and I will stop sharing. And now it's your show, Sara.
Thank you so much. I'll start sharing my screen. And here we go. And we'll do this. Okay. Do you? What do you see now? Do you see?
We see you. This is perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Glad to see you all here. As already said, my name is Sara Lerén. I work with UX and accessibility at Stendals. I'm also a board member of the non-profit organization Branschorganisationen för svensk tillgänglighet. And we organize different companies working with both physical and digital accessibility with the aim of making society more inclusive to all. Today I'm going to talk about building inclusive e-commerce. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I would say that my journey towards working with digital accessibility came from a huge interest in how human brains work. I studied something called cognitive science that has to do with human cognition. So that is when we communicate with each other, when we interact, when we learn new things, remember things, make decisions, etc. And then I stumbled upon a course in human-computer interaction. And then I realized that, okay, this is what I want to use my knowledge about human behavior for. I want to make sure that the things that we design and build are more adapted to human behavior so that we as users don't have to struggle as much. And a lot has happened since then. There's not much talk about human-computer interaction anymore. There's been some talk about usability and user-centered design and user-friendliness. And today, most of the time we talk about UX, trying to design great user experiences that both benefit users as well as the businesses who invest in these solutions. And I would say that the more I learn about human behavior, the more I realize that we are all disabled, some more than others. I mean, about 15 to 20% of the human population have some type of permanent disability, but all of us are disabled at one time or another. That became very clear during the COVID pandemic. It's very clear to me now when we have lots of crises going on in the world that we become disabled. And I mean, our brains are pretty fantastic, but they're also pretty fragile. If we live under stress for too long, we might get permanent brain damage. And it's the same with our bodies. If we treat them too bad, they might get broken in a way that we won't be able to fix. So designing for accessibility is something that benefits us all because we're all disabled when we're stressed, when we're tired, when we're grieving, when we have allergies, when we've broken a wrist, etc. So accessibility has always been important, but I would say that where we are right now in the world is even more important. That has to do with two things. The first thing is that the state of the chaos in the world today makes us all disabled. We don't deal with that level of stress and uncertainty in a good way, and then accessibility becomes even more important so that we can make good decisions and sort of stay calm and not be too stressed. And the other thing is that the laws that are already existing and that are coming up has led to an increased awareness. And that leads to higher expectations for accessible solutions. Of course, for the solutions that have to adhere to the laws, but there are also some spillover effect that affects other solutions as well. And the customers have higher expectations for accessible solutions. And I think the biggest reason to design for accessibility is, the more people can use our service, the more impact it can create. Not caring about that 15 to 20% of the human population is a missed opportunity for sure. So this is the agenda for this webinar. I will talk about the existing and the upcoming laws to make sure that you have a basic understanding of those. I will then go into accessible e-commerce and define and explain to you what that really means. And the biggest portion of this webinar will be tips and examples and some demos to help you make it work and get you started with accessibility work. And then we'll have some wrap up and some questions in the end. So if you have any questions during my talk, then feel free to post them in the meeting chat. You will also get my email address at the end, so feel free to reach out later if a question pops up this evening or tomorrow or whenever. I always like talking about accessibility. Right, so starting with the laws. The whole reason that we have accessibility laws in Sweden is that we are part of the EU, the European Union. So up in the EU, they decide on directives, and then those directives sort of trickle down and become national laws. That's the way it works. So we already have some laws in effect for the public sector, and that has to do with something called the Web Accessibility Directive that came into effect in June of 2021. And I will talk a little bit more about what that is. Where we are right now in February of 2024, there's preparation going on of the national laws for something called the European Accessibility Act. That's for the private sector, and it affects both digital and physical products, for example, e-commerce. And these laws will come into effect in June next year in all the member countries of the EU. So the laws that we have in Sweden right now are due to the Web Accessibility Directive. And because of that directive, since 2021, most of the digital services in the public sector must comply with an accessibility standard called WCAG 2.1 level AA. I won't go into detail in explaining all about WCAG. It's quite a big standard, and well, I would suggest that you take it sort of one piece at a time. I'll show you some examples later of different WCAG requirements and how you can test those. But to summarize this, the WCAG standards states that for something to be accessible, users must be able to interact not only via sight, but also via hearing and via touch, using assistive technology like screen readers, for example. So this is what we have in effect today. But then we have new laws coming up due to the European Accessibility Act, and it will become Swedish law in June next year of 2025. And this directive is a bit tricky because it includes both physical products like ticket machines and ATMs and computers and smartphones. And it also includes digital services like services for e-commerce and banking, travel, telephony, television, e-books. And that makes it a bit difficult to set requirements that will affect both physical and digital services. So they are a bit more fuzzy around the edges, I would say. And it becomes more important to actually look into the directive to check the details. I will just go through some of the law requirements that are good to know. So the European Accessibility Act says that you have to support interaction via different senses. It doesn't really point to WCAG in the way that the existing laws for the old directive does, but it says you have to be able to interact not only with sight but also via hearing and via touch. Most people are assuming that for the digital services you will have to adhere to WCAG. I just want to state that that hasn't yet been, decided. So it's a bit of a guesswork. But I would say a best guess is still to try to look at WCAG and try to comply with those requirements for the digital solutions. Another thing that the law will require is that you put out an accessibility statement. If you have a product or a solution that is affected by the law, you have to write a statement that explains if you have any accessibility issues in your solution. You also have to communicate how users can interact with you if they have any accessibility problems with your solution. That's another requirement of the law, that users must be able to communicate with you. And that's kind of a nice thing with the law, I think, that they're hoping that some of the communication will happen between the consumer and the supplier without any government body having to be involved. So I think that's a nice thing with the law. There will be the possibility for the government bodies managing these laws to issue fines due to lacking accessibility. The existing laws that we have now for the public sector, they have been in effect since 2021. Last year, the first fines were issued, one for 700,000 and one for 1.1 million. Those fines weren't issued out of the blue. They were issued after the government body had communicated with these solution providers and told them a number of times, please fix your accessibility issues. And when they hadn't done that, then they were issued these fines. There's also good to know that there are some exceptions from the law. I think one of the most important exceptions is that micro enterprises are exempt from the law. So a micro enterprise is it's a company that employs fewer than 10 people and have an annual turnover that doesn't exceed 2 million euros. So that can be good to know. Right. So accessible e-commerce. Since this is a EU directive, you have to sort of go into the directive and read, okay, what do they define as e-commerce? And this is what the European Accessibility Act says about e-commerce. It says that an e-commerce service are services that are provided at a distance through website and mobile device-based services by electronic means and at the individual request of a consumer with a view to concluding a consumer contract. These acts have pretty long sentences. You need to take a breath in the middle of reading them. What this means is that they're aiming at business to consumer and not business to business. Individual request of a consumer with a view of concluding a consumer contract. So the common interpretation of this is that business to business e-commerce will be exempt from the law. And it will only affect business to consumer e-commerce. But I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say that, I can't guarantee that that's what it will become, but this is what the directive says. Right. Whenever I encounter big areas, I like to break them down into smaller pieces because I think that makes it easier to understand. And I would say that when we talk about accessibility, it is a big area, and then it's big to sort of divide into different parts and look at one part at a time. One way to look at it is to look at what accessible solutions are. So the WCAG standard says that accessible solutions are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. That's one way of looking at it. So perceivable will be that you will be able to perceive information in different ways with different senses. Operable will be that you can navigate a specific solution with different navigation methods using assistive tech, for example. Understandable means that it must be clear and consistent, so that it's always clear to the user what they're doing, what the impact of different actions are, etc. And robust is mainly about supporting interaction with different assistive technology. So I will go through these areas, these 4 principles, one at a time, and give you some examples of what the different requirements are. Because I think that my most important recommendation for you, if you're getting started with working with accessibility, is to not try to do everything at once, but take it sort of one step at a time. Don't take the whole fern all at once. Do it one piece at a time, one little curl at a time, sort of. Accessibility isn't binary. It isn't fully accessible or fully inaccessible. It's always sort of a grayscale. And everything that you can do to make your solution a little bit more accessible, that's a good thing. It's also much more fun to do things one step at a time. Then you can do something, you can see the improvements, you can test them, you can see that you've actually started on your journey towards a more accessible solution. So the first principle is perceivable. And one of the requirements from that area is color contrast. And I would say that starting with looking at the color contrast is a great way to get started with your accessibility work. A lot of people have sight impairments. If something is to be used in different lighting conditions, then it makes sense to look at color contrast. So I would say that's a pretty good starting point. And I will show you an example of how a design can progress from being pretty inaccessible to much more accessible. So this is a design suggestion for an interface for concrete detection. That's one of the things that's most fun about my work. I get to work with crazy things that I never even knew existed. So this is an interface that is connected to talk to sensors that are put in concrete, so that you know about what the temperature is, the compactness, etc., so that you can keep track of that concrete and get good data that makes the concrete casting easier and smoother, more safe, etc. So this is a design that the product manager put together. And there are some things with it that's nice. I like some of the icons. I think that's a nice way. The contrasts aren't great. white on yellow is not a very good idea. This interface is going to be put in a physical device, sort of a tablet that can be used on the casting sites next to the casting. And if you're using it outside, then it's even more important that the contrasts are better. This is the second version of the design. This was done by the developers, and you can also see the tablet, the yellow tablet on the borders there. This isn't a great design either. It has sort of even worse contrasts. Gray on yellow is even worse than white on yellow, I would say. They were completely aware that this wasn't a good design. They were developers, they were just trying to build something. But what happened later was really great, because we were able to work together in an iterative way, where we iterated the design a couple of times. And after like 4 iterations, it looked something like this. So you can see that we've made the text bigger. We've used black text on yellow background. That is a good idea in these types of solutions. It's great contrast. It's not a coincidence that many traffic signs use black and yellow. It gives very good contrast. We put some icons there as well to make sure that it's understandable, so this is going to be used globally, and there might be users who have low literacy, and then it's a good idea to also have symbols, not only text. This is sort of the way that it can evolve when you work together, when you have focus on trying to make it both usable and accessible. Like I said, starting with looking at contrasts is kind of a good starting point. There are loads of automated tools for testing. I will give you a demo of one of my favorite automated testing tools called Wave. These testing tools are great, but they're not perfect. You should never rely on them fully, because they all have problems. With the help of an automated testing tool, you can find up to 40% of the errors. But it's still a good starting point, I would say. So let me go to this one instead. Let's do this. Do you still see my screen okay?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm at mathem.se, and when I've installed the Wave plugin, I can put it as a shortcut here. If I click on it, you'll see that it opens a little screen here that gives me a summary. It says that on this page there are 189 errors. There are 102 contrast errors, some alerts, some features, and etc. And what I really like about this is that it shows me on this page, it gets a bit cluttered, but you can still see what it is that is wrong. I can see that, okay, this little icon here has an alt text that says för vardag, skafferi och fest. This is an H3, and this text here has too low contrast. If I click on that, it says that it has a contrast of 4.23 to 1. And I know that to be WCAG compliant, you need to be at least 4.5. So this is a good testing tool to get started with, to checking contrasts. You can go into details here and look at all these errors. If you click on them, it will show you where it is. So this is nice to just get started with and to check. One of the better automated testing tools. There are lots out there. You can test others as well, but I think this is a pretty nice one. One thing that's good to know is that sometimes it gives incorrect information or information that you might interpret to be wrong. For example, if I test this on Zalando, it says that it has 48 contrast errors. And when I try to find those contrast errors, I went down to the bottom. It's here. It appears to be saying that this white text on the purple background has too low contrast, but it really hasn't. So always use these contrast checkers with, be a bit skeptical. And if you need to, there are other tools that you can use if you have two color codes to check. So I'll just turn these off here and go back to the presentation. Right, so once you start with testing, I would say automated testing tool is a great starting point. But many of the accessibility requirements can't be tested with automated test tools. You need to do it manually. And if we move forward to the operable principle, there are requirements about keyboard navigation, that a user should be able to navigate the digital solution using only a keyboard. All information should be reachable via keyboard navigation, and there shouldn't be any keyboard traps where you get stuck and can't move forward. When I test this on website, I usually find some things that aren't reachable. For example, this is a banking service where you can look at your statements, and those icons there are sort of things that you can click to flag a statement. When I went through this with a keyboard, it didn't reach those flagging buttons. And usually when a page consists of only pure HTML, there usually aren't many issues with being able to reach certain different contents and different objects on a web page. But when you've created custom-built objects and you haven't made those accessible, then they might not be able to work. This is a toggle that was custom built, and I wasn't able to reach that when I navigated with a keyboard. I would say testing keyboard navigation is even easier than doing automated testing tools. You don't have to install anything. You just need a keyboard, and you probably already have that. And I will show you how that looks. Right, so here I am at Mathem. If I go to the address bar and then I start to tab, you can see that first it goes to Mathem, then it goes to the search, then it goes to the notifications, the shopping cart, and it goes to Hem and categories, and I click tab and it disappears. And that's because there's a submenu here that is shown on mouse over. And if I'm not on mouse over, I don't see that. And I need to click through a lot of these before I get to recipes. And then it's the same thing. It disappears. I click tab, 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 tab. Ah, here it is. And I have to click through all of these to get forward. This isn't very accessible. There's also a requirement in WCAG that says that if you have recurring information, you should provide some way for the user to skip those. Zalando has worked with accessibility. I can tell when I test their site. So if I click tab here, I get this information, and then I get an option here that says skip to main content or skip to search. So here they have sort of a way to skip the recurring content. So if I select skip to main content, I'll go here. If I click tab, I also get a possibility to skip forwards over this carousel. If I do that, then I go down to the different brands. So testing with a keyboard is good both for ensuring that it works for someone using a keyboard, also for ensuring that it works for someone using a screen reader, because they typically also navigate in sort of a sequential way. Doing those sorts of tests, if you make sure that the keyboard navigation works, then some of the screen reader navigation will probably also work. The third principle of WCAG is understandable. And it has some of my favorite requirements. One that says that the navigation has to be consistent. And that's sort of a pet peeve of mine as a UXer when navigation is inconsistent. And this is something that needs to be manually tested. You can't really test understandability in an automated way. And also, if humans are supposed to be using your solution, then you should test it with those users. It's not enough that you understand. Your users need to understand if they should be able to use your solution in a good way. So I've been working with Volvo construction equipment for the last 1.5 years. This is what their web page used to look like. It's kind of a lot of information. You can see in the top in the gray bar that they have 6 different items. This is Volvo CE, our offer, product archive, news and events, career, and building tomorrow. And then they had some inconsistent navigation as well. If you clicked on this as Volvo CE, you'd get this submenu here that would appear. That's also a bit overwhelming. It has 7 different items that, what we see when we look at usage of these pages is that whenever there's too much information, users tend to just scroll by because they can't be bothered. But we also noticed that when we clicked on the other menu items like our offer or product archive, we got to a landing page. So only this as Volvo CE had that sub-menu. And then we did some usability testing. We noticed when we tested on 5 different users that 3 of those 5 users were confused by that inconsistent navigation of the sub-menu. And they said things like, why does only this one have a submenu? I would have wanted submenus for all of them. Which, it makes sense. It's confusing when it works in different ways. When it has a certain design and things look like they should behave the same, then they should behave the same. I just want to show you how it looks today, because it's been really fun working with Volvo construction equipment and seeing their webpage improved. So remember that there were 6 different items here before. Now there are only 4, which I think make it much calmer, also more accessible. Now these items in the main menu, they behave the same. On mouse over, they show these submenus. And if I click on them, I get to the different landing pages. Which makes sense, because that's typically how these types of menus work. And if there are some common navigation patterns for an item, I would suggest sticking to those patterns and not coming up with new confusing navigation patterns. So the fourth principle of the WCAG standard is robust, and it has mostly to do with supporting the use of assistive technology like screen readers, navigating with a keyboard or some other tool, navigating with a braille board, etc. And some of this can be tested with automated test tools, but the bulk of it requires manual testing. And if your site is to be used by humans, then it should be tested by humans. If you really want to test assistive technology, you should really test it on experienced users of assistive technology. I do some testing with screen readers, but I'm not an accustomed screen reader user. So I can only get it sort of, yeah, it works, but I don't know if it makes sense to someone who is an experienced screen reader user. The robust section of WCAG has some specific requirements. One of the most common problems is that even though most of the things are correctly read, when an error message appears, it isn't read by the screen reader because it's not in focus. So when you design for screen reader use, you need to make sure that all the messages that can pop up grabs the attention of the screen reader so that the user doesn't miss them. Like in this case, where this is an app where you're supposed to change your address, and it posts an error message there that says, please provide a valid postcode, but that isn't read by the screen reader. So for someone using a screen reader, there would be no way of understanding why they couldn't move forward. Right, so apart from being a bit smart about where you start, I would also suggest, some sort of iterative approach. I would say that holds for any type of design or development work, to have an iterative approach. Like I said, it's much more fun as well. Like the concrete interface. That was really fun because we were able to work iteratively, where we could, we built built something, we did a design, they built it, we tested it, and then we repeated. I've done accessibility work in different ways. I mean, sometimes I've done complete WCAG testing of a certain solution, and then I've sort of handed over what I found in that test. But when you give something as big as that to someone, it's not very actionable, and it can be difficult to know where to start. Even if I always try to give recommendations of, you could start here or do that, but it can be a bit overwhelming. So it's worked much better when I've done accessibility work and we've started with a certain area or a certain user scenario, or supporting a certain user, etc. Because then I can do some testing. We can do improvements in the design, we build them, we test again, and then we see that it actually became better. It's much more fun to work when you see that your work has actually led to an improvement. And apart from doing this work in an iterative way, I would also suggest to try to work as cross-functionally as you can. because accessibility isn't a one-person job. It requires collaboration. And even if I can do some of the work, I can do some testing, I can do some design work, I need to collaborate with a visual designer, a front-end developer, a tester, etc. And when it's worked best is when we've had a sort of a small cross-functional team, because then it's possible to start small with, you know, exploring a certain area, testing that, designing and building and learning as we move along. So to summarize before we go into the wrap up and answer additional questions, I would say to get started with accessibility, you should not try to do everything at once. Pick a starting point, like color contrast or keyboard navigation, or something that you feel passionate about, or a certain, you know, user flow that's really important. Try to see how you can improve that. Iterate and collaborate as much as you can, because if you're only one person working with accessibility, it doesn't scale very well. It's not very sustainable. You need to sort of try to share your knowledge so that more people feel responsible and are involved in the accessibility work. Thank you, and good luck. I need to start with. I hope this has been helpful for you. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or you want to talk more. I always want to talk about accessibility, almost always.
Thank you, Sara. This was great, I think. I learned a lot as well. We have a few questions before we leave. We had Maria asked a question about which tool is the best in the market for assessing color contrasts, in your opinion. So, in your expert opinion on on tools for assessing color contrasts. Or do you have a favorite? Is it Wave or do you have other? Yeah.
I would say quick and dirty testing. I would say Wave, but as I showed you, when I noticed that Wave is all sometimes giving conflicting information. Like it seems to be saying that this is inaccessible, like white text on the purple background. But when I check the color contrasts, it's really not. So I would say. Let me just find this one and I can share it with you straight away.
Would it possibly be good to test with multiple tools then, when in terms of color contrast, so you can use one or two of them, or maybe three, and see which one wins?
You can do that. I mean, I suggest using some different automated testing tools to find which one you like best. But I posted a link to the contrast checker that I really like, where because sometimes you need to pick the specific color codes and test them.
Okay, thank you. So if you see there, Maria, Sara posted in the chat about contrastchecker.com. And Jon Fredelius also added color contrast analyzer from TPIGI is a good manual tool as well. So there's a few tips for Maria. And Sami asked if there is any plugins that you could run like earlier in the design process, like there's plugins for Figma, or does it make sense to test that early in the design phase, or is it better to test when you're live on the website?
I think you should test as soon as you can.
Yeah.
So definitely, there are some different plugins to Figma that you can use. Things are moving so fast in Figma that I don't really, I haven't really kept track of which one is the best. But definitely, there are some great Figma plugins that you can use to check your color contrasts in your design.
Perfect. Thank you. And Jon also had a question about the Volvo site, that the menu behaves differently in the global site versus the Swedish site. Is that a strategic market decision, or is there other reasons for that, without spilling the beans on Volvo or CE?
Yeah, good question. The thing is that the reason why Volvo CE got a new design is that Volvo Group has created a new design system, which I think is fantastic, really great. So we started using that on the global site. So the global Volvo CE site, volvoce.com, now has the new design using the Volvo Group design system. But we haven't yet gotten to the market sites, but we're getting there. So fingers crossed. We're doing a lot of QA testing now, but once we're done with that, they will have the new and improved design as well.
So it's basically the market sites that are lagging behind the main design system then. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it totally makes sense. The .com site is sort of a corporate site. It's learn more about us and jobs and news and stuff. But I mean the real businesses happens on the market sites.
Yeah,
that's where the products are. So you don't want to go in and mess with that when you're trying things out. With the corporate page, we could experiment a lot. We don't want to experiment on the market pages because then
of course
the different market representative might get mad.
Of course. And back to I'm going from the top in the questions and just going straight down so I don't miss anything. We got a question from Bobby. What other laws do you see is important if you look country by country? That's probably a fairly broad question.
Laws that I know about. I know that Norway has stricter laws. You should, if you're working, if your solution is on the Norwegian market, you should look that up. USA also has stricter laws called the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. I know that the UK have some stricter requirements for banking and e-commerce stuff. UK is a bit tricky because they were part of the EU when it was decided about the European Accessibility Act, but they're not part of the EU now. So we're not really sure what's going to happen with the UK. But I would suggest that there might be different. Norway and the US I know about. UK when it comes to banking and e-commerce have some varying laws. Yeah.
But if you look country by country, would that mean that there is a possibility that you might have to do adaptations to individual countries, which can turn this into quite a hassle to keep track of all the accessibility laws and recommendations for each country? It becomes very, very hard to manage, I think, when you're working to multiple markets.
Definitely. And I mean, we're seeing that customers here in Sweden actually let their lawyers look at the directive.
Yeah.
To sort of have a a legal interpretation of it, of how
Yeah.
they should proceed. Because something that I can say about the European Accessibility Directive, I mean, it's not very good timing to put in a new directive when sort of the world is burning.
Yeah.
All the member countries are late
Yeah.
with defining who should manage this, who should do the testing. Yeah, and especially since the European Accessibility Act is both digital and physical.
Yeah.
So there will be different government bodies managing this. I think about 4 of them, like DIG, PTS, and a couple of more.
Yeah. And as usual, when you ask a lawyer for recommendations, you get a straight and clear answer, so you know exactly what to do afterwards. We also have we got a clarification here from Anna on the topic of the law, so I'm just going to flick in with that. She would like to add that most legislations point to the EN standard, as it is an EU directive. So beginning there is a good start. And that sounds reasonable to me, at least, not knowing anything about this. But yes. Good. Yeah. Did I miss anything? No. Martin used text on an image. How do you test contrast on text on image? And especially if the text repositions as you scroll down and use multiple devices. Like if you switch from a laptop or full screen to tablet to mobile, and the text, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the easiest way is to not put text on images. But if you really need to, then it requires you to do some extensive testing, and then I think you should use a tool that can identify colors and then test them in a color contrast checker. And try to move it to see that it works when the image is scaled in different ways. But that's really, tricky. You have to, and it's not really clear which pixel do I pick. So you need to test thoroughly if you want to make sure that works.
Yeah. That has been something that we work with our customers a lot as well, to try to avoid text on image, but it looks good to most people, so it's hard to it's not fun to avoid.
No. I mean, when we work with Volvo C, I mean they have images with text. We have sort of CSS shading that appears at the bottom, which makes it looks sort of okay. But then the person behind that image gets a bit sad. So what went so dark?
Yeah,
looking is good. Yeah, always these compromises.
Of course. Besides, we've talked a lot about testing color contrasts with both automatically and manually. Do you have any other software or plugins that are good for testing to improve accessibility in other areas than just color contrasts?
Yeah, I use, let me just see what it's called. There are some different web developer toolbars that you can also use. I can check which one I've used and give you I have it as a plugin, but I can check the web page that you go to install it, and we can put that in the email that you send out later, Adam.
Yeah, I think we can probably create a link library in the email that will follow this, where we will also incorporate the link to the slide deck and the recording as well.
Good.
So we can address multiple tips, useful tips for plugins and systems afterwards.
Perfect.
As well. June W3C has a fairly updated list of countries and their laws concerning accessibility. That's a good link as well, June. Thank you for that.
Perfect. Thanks.
So we will add that as well in the email, because that could be dead useful. Lots of update. This is actually fun. That it's a topic that creates so much engagement from the audience as well. So that's fun. Erik also added that there is it's not uncommon that U.S. Customers are filing lawsuits against companies that have sites that are inaccessible. That sells to the U.S. market, and that's probably a systematic thing, kind of in the U.S. So, well, if U.S. is an important market for you as a company, then you should probably start with making that site, your U.S. market site, accessible first, before you get into troubles with the legal system in the U.S. But speaking of the U.S. As well, is there, because they have the federal laws and then on the state level as well, do the accessibility demands differ on states as well? That's a very specific question. No would be the best answer, probably.
Well, yes, it does. But I mean, the ADA law is anti-discriminatory laws, and how good people are at filing lawsuits, I mean, that differs between different states, for sure. So it's all about not discriminating, and discrimination is not very important or totally overlooked in some states, and very important in other states. So I would say it has to do with that sort of culture. Also, how much education people have, because you need money to be able to file a lawsuit, etc. So it has a lot to do with that.
Perfect. Okay, I think that was it for now. We get a lot of thank yous in the chat. It was very good to have you talk about this, Sara. Very important topic as well. And also thank you to you, our visitors, for good engagement and very good discussions in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Fun with some questions, and also that you're sharing tips and links in the chat. Like I said, this is all about collaboration. One person can't do it all. We need to help each other out. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Perfect. Okay. That's it for today then, and I will try to send out a follow-up email as soon as possible. We have a few links to collect and tools, but bear with me. You will get the email. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sara, and thank you to you guys for listening in.